Hello and welcome to Beef Cattle 101. My name is Jeannie Dudding and I'm the A&R agent in Giles County. Let me give you a little background information about myself. I grew up in Connecticut and did not grow up on a beef cattle farm. I grew up with horses and eventually got into showing beef cattle through 4-H and FFA. It was my experiences through showing that actually brought me to Virginia because I was working on a variety of farms down here. Now, I tell you this to share my story with you. I brought my last few show heifers from Connecticut to Virginia with me, and the majority of our herd that my husband and I have right now go back to those last 3 show cattle. We consider ourselves first-generation farmers, and I can tell you that we learned a lot of lessons the hard way over the last 20 years. I hope that the information I share with you today will help maybe prevent some of those hard lessons that he and I learned. And from our experiences, I wanted to share a few key points with you. 1, find yourself a valuable network of people who support you in beef cattle. Find yourself a mentor producer and try to make that connection before you even jump into purchasing cattle. Always use research-based information. Be very aware of what is on the internet because, as you know, anybody who thinks they're an expert at something can put stuff on the internet. So just be cautious of what type of information that you use, and I would always encourage you to look to your land-grant universities for that information. As I have heard in other talks through our series, Beef Cattle 101 could be far more than a 30-minute talk, so I'm going to try to fit as much information as I can into our time together. As we move through this presentation, here are just a few things to consider as you get started in the beef cattle industry. Type of operation that you think you want, what your marketing goals will be, nutrition and herd health for your livestock, pasture and grazing, and then we will finish up with Let's start by talking about different types of operations. Beef cattle are raised across the U.S. with 31 million head of beef cattle on nearly 730,000 farms and ranches. Cattle are one of the top commodities in my area of Southwest Virginia. Cattle are able to better utilize our sloping and even steeper mountainous land that we would not be able to get equipment over in order to produce other commodities. Cow-calf operations are the most common type of operations we see here. A cow-calf herd refers to a group of cattle kept for breeding. We have 2 types of cow-calf operations, commercial and seed stock or registered herds. Commercial refers to cattle that are typically not registered with a breed association or are a cross of multiple breeds or what we call crossbred. Commercial herds generally aim to sell their calves just after weaning, and we refer to these as feeder cattle. Most feeder cattle sold would be weighing in the 500 to 900 pound range. We have a number of feeder cattle marketing options in Virginia, which we will talk about a little later on. Some cow-calf operations may hold their feeder cattle over to be sold as more yearling type cattle that would be more ideal to go directly into finishing operations. Seed stock or registered herds are made up of those females and bulls that are registered with a particular breed association. These cattle would typically be sold through registered breed sales or by private treaty. There is some demand for registered cattle for youth livestock projects through 4-H and FFA, as well as some producers looking to start commercial herds from reputable seed stock operations. Backgrounders or stockers, this is the in-between location for feeder cattle to be grown out a little longer before going into a finishing situation. Most cattle in this category would generally be out on pasture versus a more confined feeding area. I also have poundage cattle listed here on our slide. Poundage cattle refers to cattle owned by one producer but grazed on the property of another during the summer months. These cattle are normally turned out in the spring and gathered in the fall. The property owner is then paid for the amount of weight the cattle gained. This is an option for someone getting into cattle that isn't interested in the time investment of a cow-calf operation, but has pasture enough to hold a group of feeder calves for the summer. Last on our list is the finishers or feedlots. Most feedlots where Virginia feeder cattle go are in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and the Midwest. This is where cattle go to be fed on heavy feed in order to be finished out for processing. We do have some producers in Virginia that finish out cattle to sell directly to consumers. There is a demand, a growing demand for locally sourced beef and niche market sales like grass-fed. So there's different ways of purchasing cattle depending on what type of operation that you want to establish. So here under cow-calf producers, we've got three main ways in which we would establish a cow-calf herd. So you can start out with young cattle by buying heifers of either weaning age, breeding age, or already developed bred heifers. Option number two is if you knew of somebody who was dispersing of an already established herd, you could purchase that entire herd, or you could purchase some individual cows from an already established herd. Two main points to keep in mind here is to look for genetic potential in the herd and also a health program. And this is where producer records really come into play. So hopefully whoever you're purchasing the cows from can provide you some kind of records, especially on that health program. And if no health records can be provided, then it would be important to have a vet check out the herd before you purchase them, because it's a huge investment. You know, some of those things that you would want to know are the age of the cows, if they're pregnant, when are they due to calve, etc. December and January can be an ideal time to purchase cows, particularly if you have the feed resources. You would definitely need to make sure that you have the feed resources to carry them through winter if this is the time of year that you choose to purchase cows. And the reason why more cows can be found this time of year is because you may have producers that are looking to unload some because they don't have the necessary feed resources. In considering what type of breeds you think you would like to have in your operation, your marketing goals will play into this breed selection as well. But when we're talking about typical herds, we refer to maternal breeds and terminal breeds. Those cattle that fall in under the maternal breeds are Angus, Herefords, Shorthorn, Red Angus, and these are breeds that are known for their moderate size, mothering abilities, and being high milk producers. Your terminal breeds are breeds like your Charolais, Gelbvieh, Limousin, Simmental, and Maine Anjou. Now, if we want to take, actually, let me rewind. Those terminal breeds, they are known to be kind of our larger breeds, heavy muscled, larger boned, and real growthy type of cattle. Now, if we want to get the best of both worlds, that's when we look at some of our crossbreeds. And we take advantage of what we call hybrid vigor. And that is taking the best traits of the maternal and the terminal and getting them by crossbreeding. And some of those breeds that are popular in this area, Sim Angus, Maintainers, Beefmaster, and Limflex. So those would be some of our crossbreeds. Whichever breed you choose to go with, it is important to understand that your mama cows have a job, and their job is to raise one calf per year and without assistance, and to be as easy maintenance as possible. So that means they maintain their BCS without huge weight fluctuations to where they would need supplemental feed beyond the basics. Something else or someone else who is very important in your herd is your bull. And so you want to buy the best bull that you can afford. And one of the main reasons for that is your bull, although he's here for a short time, you know, a few years, a few calf crops, but if you choose to keep females from him, he is going to have an influence in your herd for several years if you keep females out of him. And I think something that's you want to make sure you consider when you're purchasing a good bull is that you select one that complements the traits of your females. And on the other side of that, you want to make sure that he improves on the weaknesses that you may see in your cows. When we move down into backgrounders or stocker cattle, there's a couple different ways that we can source stocker cattle as well. You can go to some local farms and buy in small groups, you know, 3 or 4 here and there. You can source stocker cattle. You have the option to buy them in groups and in loads, or full loads, or even partial loads through things like VQA sales, tele-auctions, directly from producers that have larger herds, and you can source stocker cattle that way. Another option would be poundage cattle. And the way poundage cattle works is that you are grazing cattle that belong to another larger producer, and you would keep them throughout the summer months, and you would be paid on a gain basis. So the cattle are weighed when you drop them off, weighed when you pick them up, and then that is what you are paid your yearly paycheck on. One advantage of having poundage cattle is that you don't have to winter them. You don't have mama cows that are out there calving who could potentially have problems. You know, generally they're brought to your place in the spring and picked up in the fall, and that really works well for some people. Now, a way to source poundage cattle would be through a farmer network in your area and talking to other producers who may be interested in grazing some cattle on your land. Of course, your extension agent may know of some sources where you could secure some poundage cattle, or even different cattle associations may be able to help with that, like your feeder cattle associations that are tied in with your local markets. So our third bullet on here are the finishers, and oftentimes if you're looking for some cattle that you want to feed out, you can, very similar to the stocker cattle, you can purchase loads through VQA sales of heavy, 8 to 9 weight cattle, through the VQA sales, through tele-auction sales, and you can even find some, through your weekly markets. But if you're looking for a larger group that is more uniform, similar genetic makeup, have followed a very particular health protocol, then I would encourage you to go through a VQA or a tele-auction type sale if you are looking to find some cattle that you can finish out. Marketing goals. So it is very important for you to have very clear and outlined marketing goals for your operation. Knowing what those marketing goals are going to drive some of the bullet points that you see here, and vice versa. Some of these bullet points here are going to drive what your marketing goals are. For example, breed. Deciding which breed you're going to go with should be based on what your marketing goals are. If you want to go into the grass-fed niche marketing side of the business, then you may look at breeds like a Devon. If feeder cattle is what your ultimate goal are, and getting the most that you can out of a VQA sale or other type of preconditioned sale, then you may want to go with a Sim Angus breed. So again, being very clear in your marketing goals is going to drive what breed you have in your operation. Same thing with calving seasons. If you're going the feeder cattle route, then you need to understand what the markets look like for selling feeder cattle throughout the year. In our area, July and August from a fall calving herd are an ideal time to sell cattle. Are there sales in November for the spring calving group? Absolutely. Okay, but knowing what markets are available in your area may very well drive which calving season you choose to go with, be it a spring or a fall. Knowing what marketing programs are available in your area. You've heard me say VQA sales numerous times. Okay, the VQA sales through Virginia Quality Assured program are with the Virginia Cattlemen's Association. And these are preconditioned sales of well-managed, high-quality cattle. And because of the management that goes along with this type of marketing, you see a premium on the cattle that are sold. But some of what goes into these preconditioned cattle are that they're already weaned for at least 6 weeks. They are on feed, they're castrated, no horns. They follow a certain health protocol like being vaccinated. Deworming is encouraged, implanting is encouraged, but not necessary. And so that is one of the most popular marketing programs here in Virginia. Now there are weekly markets, sale barns, that put together groups of cattle as well. So that's another option. So again, knowing very clearly what your marketing goals are
can be influenced by what marketing programs are available in your area. The type of equipment that you need for your operation can be influenced by what your marketing goals are. If you're going to do poundage cattle and you're only going to have those cattle in on your farm from the spring to the fall, well, then you may not need haymaking equipment of any kind. So you may have reduced need for tractors and things like that on your farm. You may not need your own truck and trailer if you're not having to haul the cattle. But then if you do have a cow-calf operation, then there is a higher demand for equipment. Cattle working facilities are a must in any operation, regardless of what your marketing goals are. And we're going to touch on that a little bit later. I've already hit on this a little bit, knowing about the locations of markets. Do you have a sale barn that's close to you? That is a very solid question that you need to have an answer to. If you are going to go more the retail end of processing beef, then you need to know where your processors are. How close is a slaughterhouse to your location? Very important to know. Niche marketing. If you are in a general vicinity closer to a more urban area, can you take advantage of large-scale farmers markets and things like that and meet a niche market demand for consumers? So again, understanding your marketing goals and having very clear, concise goals is very important for your operation. So let's talk about nutrition. Nutrition definitely comes into your decision when you're deciding whether you're going to go with a spring calving herd or a fall calving herd, because management nutritionally is very different between the two calving seasons. So with a spring herd, you can get by with feeding an average quality hay after the calves have been weaned in that October-November timeframe, leading up till about January. Once you're getting about 2 months out from calving, then you need to start feeding a higher quality hay just before calving to make sure that they're maintaining their body weight and can kind of prepare for that spring calving season. So once calves are born, we move into that spring flush, the green up of grass, and when the spring calving herd really hits their high nutritional demand, you should have those pastures to rely on to meet their needs when they're hitting peak lactation and the demand of breeding back is upon them. Now with the fall calving herd, there's a lot of advantages to a fall calving herd for sure, but one thing about having a fall calving herd is that you've got to be a great manager of nutrition with your fall calving herd, because they're coming off pasture just prior to calving, towards the tail end of the pasture season, and so they've had good nutrition in preparation for calving. But then as if they calve in September, October, November, then they're going to start hitting peak lactation in that November, December, January time frame. And at that same time, we're expecting them to breed back while they are also trying to maintain their body weight through the winter months. So it gets a little bit trickier nutritionally for meeting their demands when they are in that winter time frame and hitting peak lactation with your fall calving herd. So again, nutritionally, a fall calving herd requires a much better nutritional manager and more feed inputs. So stage of life is very important in cattle, the same as it is with humans. So a calf is generally getting their nutritional demands met through mama's milk, also any grass that they may transition into or other forage inputs. And protein is really important in that calf and young growing animal stage. With our pre-breeding animals, with heifers especially, we think about them, cycling and being fertile. With bulls, we want to make sure that they are producing and maturing the way that we need them to produce so that they can go into herds and breed cows for us. Your mature bulls, their nutrition is very, very important too. And I think sometimes these guys get overlooked. When they're turned in with cows, they're busy guys, and if they're doing their job the way that they should, and it's really easy for bulls to lose weight when they're out there working. And and like any of us, they can't do their best job if they don't have the nutrition that they need. And and in the period of time when they're pulled off of cows and between breeding seasons, then you need to make sure that if they've lost weight, that we get them back up to the body condition score that is desirable if they have lost weight during the breeding season. Mature cows. So with mature cows, body condition score is very important. And of course, the body condition score goes from a 1 being the skinniest, if you will, to 9 being very heavy fleshed. And so ideally we want our cows at a 5 is what is most desirable. Maybe a 6 a little bit before calving season, just so they've got some extra when they hit peak lactation, because lactation is a huge draw on a cow's system. And so if they're skinny going into calving, it is really hard to put weight on a cow that has calved and is lactating. And so a lot of times if a cow's not getting her nutritional demands met, then she's not going to breed back or breed back on time for us like we would like her to be. So it's really important to make sure that mature cows are getting the demands met. The main classifications of nutrients that we are most concerned about when it comes to feeding cattle. So water is number 1, and a fresh, clean, and adequate supply of water is most important. The proximity of water to the cattle is also very important, because research has shown that cattle will drink less water if they've got to walk far distances to get it. So keep that in mind when setting up pastures and fences and giving them access to sources of water. Energy, our next category, very, very important, and I think a lot of people sometimes get confused between energy and protein. Energy is what is most important for cattle maintaining body weight. And so especially in your winter months when you're supplementing, energy is what you want to focus on in what you're feeding. So corn, barley, oats, wheats, that's going to be your main sources of energy in your cattle ration. Protein. Protein is available in most grains or supplemental feeds in the form of soybean meal, cottonseed meal, corn gluten, and oftentimes brewer's grain. And so protein, again, is very important for growth, not as much for weight gain. Then vitamins and minerals. So it is preferred to feed a loose salt and trace mineral versus blocks and tubs, but blocks and tubs can be used as well. One thing about your minerals that, especially in our area, you want to make sure that it's got some added selenium, because we are in a selenium deficient area. Something else that you need to pay attention to with your mineral is putting out a high magnesium mineral. The recommendation is at least January to June. Some producers choose just to leave it out all year long because that added cost is a benefit. Even though it's an added cost, they would rather pay that than have a cow end up with grass tetany. So a high mag mineral is very important in our cattle herds. Moving into our next topic, which is herd health. At the very top of my list, I have veterinarian client-patient relationship. Your vet is someone that you should be able to call on as a resource to help you make sound decisions within your operation. No matter how experienced of a producer you are, you should call on your veterinarian more often than just when you have an emergency. It is important for your vet to be familiar with your herd health protocol, and your operation goals. The next bullet point I have here on the slide is the use of vaccinations. The most important component, other than your veterinarian, is the use of vaccination. Any health program should include vaccinations for IBR, parainfluenza, BRSV, BVD, somnus, leptospirosis, and the clostridial diseases, which are blackleg. As far as Deworming. Deworming is a plan that you should work out with your veterinarian. Now, similar to companion animals, you can do fecal tests to help you outline the best deworming schedule for your operation. But again, that's something that I would encourage you to reach out to your veterinarian to help develop. As far as lice and flies, people probably don't realize the economic loss that is experienced from lice and lack of fly control within our herds. I get a lot of questions about pink eye, and I always ask people as my first question, what are you doing for fly control? So I can't stress to producers enough how important it is to make sure that they are utilizing the tools that we have for fly control as well as lice in the winter. Something else to consider when we're talking about herd health is that prevention is a whole lot cheaper than treatment. Here are some general practices to help keep our herds healthier. Stocking density. Make sure that you are aware of what the recommended stocking density is for your area. You will learn to gauge on what stocking density is best for your system of pasture management. Record keeping. Record keeping is so important, and I know that it is something that I am even guilty of letting slide more than I should. It is very, very important to keep track of records, and that's everything from herd health to number of bales made on certain fields, dates that you put bulls in and take bulls out. Try to record everything you can. The more information you have, the more successful you can be in making decisions within your operation. Identification. It is so important to make sure that cattle have some form of identification. Ear tag numbers. If you have an animal that is sick, you have an employee that can tell you what number is sick or what animals need to be treated, recording that information, knowing what type of medicine that was given. If you've got animals that are out and your neighbor calls and he can tell you what numbers they are, then you know what pasture they're from. Identification of your animals is something that is so basic yet so important. Grouping cattle together, and cattle can be grouped in a number of different ways. When we're talking about younger animals, they're probably going to be grouped. Weaned animals may be based on age. When we talk about calving groups with the mature cows, keep your spring calving cows together, keep your fall calving cows together. It's just really important for nutrition as well as overall best management to keep our cattle grouped together. Low stress cattle handling, something that is so crucial to make sure that we are handling our cattle not only for the healthiest way for them, but also for the humans that are involved with handling the cattle. Cattle can get riled up. They are large animals. We can all get hurt, humans and animals, and it's just not worth it. Also, you've got to consider the long-term effect of stress on cattle. Research has shown that how stress and different cattle reactions to things can follow through with them through their overall performance when they go from being feeder cattle to finished cattle, how it can affect the meat. And so I think that's something we need to be mindful of because we want to make sure that we are delivering the best product possible to our consumers. Our next bullet point on here is clean environments, and that's talking about calving areas, weaning areas, you name it. We need to try to keep our environments as clean as possible to help keep down disease and the spread of disease within our operations. Now, we all get mud. I acknowledge that. There's certain times of the year that you just can't afford, or you just can't avoid the mud. But just try to do what's best to keep areas clean where animals congregate. And then the last bullet point on here is weaning strategies. And there are so many different weaning strategies that are out there in research that is favorable for so many of the different strategies. And you just need to find what works best for you, what works best with the facilities that you have. But weaning, kind of tying into that low stress cattle handling, weaning we have found is so important to the overall performance of cattle, going from mama, again, to the grocery store shelf. It is so important to keeping those cattle healthy throughout their life when they are weaned in ideal conditions. Moving into our last slide here on herd health, let's talk about biosecurity. Our first bullet point here, which we have touched on previous slides, is just to reiterate that we should make sure that we are buying cattle from reputable sources. Make sure that it is a well-managed herd with an established vaccination program. Usually our recommendations are not to buy breeding animals from the sale barn unless it is a sale that is designated as a breeding animal sale. Oftentimes, if an animal is there as an individual at the sale barn, it's probably because there is some kind of health problem, and unless there's records, there's no way for you to really know why an animal is there at the sale barn. So we just typically don't recommend buying breeding animals unless it's from a special sale at the sale barn. Our next bullet point here is any animal that you're bringing in, no matter what herd they come from, make sure that you isolate them before turning them in with the herd. And again, this is females, or if you're bringing in any new bulls for breeding season, make sure that you isolate them and put them in quarantine so that if there is any kind of problem that's going to show up, you can see it and then hopefully address it before turning them out with the rest of the herd. Our next bullet point here about limiting traffic. And so this includes the feed truck that may go in and out of everybody's farm in the county, as well as people coming in on foot. So try to always be conscious of who has access to what areas on your farm, and maybe areas that they have been before visiting your farm. Cleaning out the trailer. No, that is never anyone's favorite job, but is unfortunately something that needs to be done on a regular basis. So especially if you're hauling animals that aren't yours, you need to make sure that you clean out the trailer. But just for overall decrease in transmission of disease, we need to make sure that we're keeping all environments as clean as possible, including the trailer. On our last slide, we talked about making sure that pastures are clean and areas around waterers, feed rings, dragging pastures, those types of things, especially calving areas when you're going to have calves and you want to try to keep them out of the mud. Switching gears here a little bit, let's talk about pasture. So your pastures must be taken care of like anything else within your operation. And pastures are your cheapest feed resource for your operation as well. So making sure that you have adequate acreage for the number of head that you are grazing is very important. We've already touched on stocking density a little bit. And you want to make sure that you are not overgrazing your pastures by having too many head of cattle on your fields. Fencing is also very important to make sure that you are keeping animals where they belong, and also being able to cross fence and things like that we'll get into a little bit in my next big bullet point. Soil testing and adding amendments to your pasture is also very important, making sure that pH is adjusted, and soil testing, amendments, things like fertilizer and this adding lime also helps with weeds. And which takes us into spraying. Spraying is one of the most valuable tools that we have for managing pastures and keeping healthy, dense forage within our pastures and eliminating those weeds. So when it comes to grazing, there are so many different strategies out there. Some people just fully graze an entire piece of acreage. Some folks do strip grazing, some folks do mob grazing. Stockpiling is a very valuable tool that we have in our grazing toolbox, and one that I think is one of the most valuable in our area, where we are able to stockpile those fall pastures and be able to have lush green grass up into January and February time of year instead of having to put out round bales that time of year. Stockpiling, as I said, is a very valuable tool. The use of summer annuals when we hit that summer slump, when our cool season grasses kind of phase out on us in that July, August, early August time frame, the use of summer annuals is becoming more and more popular. And like with a lot of these things in our operations, you've got to find what works best for you, what fits your budget, what fits your marketing goals, what fits your overall operation goals, what land do you have, your resources available to you. So, I encourage you to seek a number of different sources and when it comes to grazing and find what works best for you. The bottom line when we talk about grazing is that the longer you can extend the grazing season, the more money it's going to save you in terms of winter feeding. So seek out those variety of resources to learn as much as you can about grazing. Within Virginia Cooperative Extension, we have an initiative called Graze 300, and I would encourage you to visit our website. You can just Google Graze 300. All right, so equipment is the last topic that we are going to cover together. And, as I said in our first few slides about types of operation, the type of operation that you have and the way you manage it is going to depict what type of equipment that you have. This is in no way a list of things that you absolutely have to have other than cattle handling facilities. I will say that. So cattle handling facilities are a must for both your safety and the animal safety. You may not have a huge fancy system like your neighbor has, but you need to have some way to catch cattle up and at minimum a head chute to be able to work on animals if necessary. So definitely something to get them up with. Hay equipment you may or may not need, depending on how you choose to feed through the winter if you are keeping cattle through the winter. Some folks find it more cost effective for them to buy hay instead of making their own hay and having to maintain equipment. That's a decision that you need to, work on a budget and within your operation and see if it's a necessity for you or if you're better off to buy hay. Some type of barn or shop area where you can store veterinary supplies, hay and grain storage, somewhere to work on equipment, anywhere to store tools, things like that. So, depending on the size of your operation, will depict what type of barn structures that you need to have. Kind of going back to the cattle handling facility, some type of maternity or sick pen, quarantine area is very helpful to have, a place that you can get an animal up by himself or herself if need be. And I probably should add on to here an area to wean cattle, as well as an area to quarantine cattle as well. Another area that is important to have somewhere on your farm is somewhere where you can put bulls in the non-breeding season, because ideally we want to stay away from year-round calving. So an area that you can put your bulls up is important to separate them from the rest of the herd. And then just some little stuff to keep in mind that you may need to purchase when you are starting an operation. Things like feed bunks, hay rings if you're going to be feeding round bales, creep gates or feeders if you want to creep feed your calves. And if you're not familiar with what a creep gate or a creep feeder is it's a gate or a feeder that allows calves to get in, but the cows cannot if you want to supplement your calves while they're on mama. Electric fencing if you're going to do any kind of strip grazing or mob grazing, and cross fencing for managing your grazing. So this is just kind of some of the bigger things to think about equipment wise that you would need to purchase for your operation, depending on how you manage your. As we wrap up our time together, I acknowledge that we have only barely scratched the surface of topics that we could have talked about surrounding beef cattle. I hope that I have given you a base of information to at least get started from. Like any business undertaking, there's a lot of different things to consider and weigh out, and having a solid business plan in place is what will allow your business to be successful no matter what commodity it is that you go into with farming. And just one last point that I wanted to make sure that you take with you is that no matter what operation you may choose to go into, make sure that you create a network of support and resources. And some of those folks that should be in your support system include extension, your various service providers like your veterinarian, farm service agency, soil and water, natural resources conservation service, local co-ops, your county farm bureau federation, and then also consider professional associations. You know, those associated with beef cattle include the Virginia and the National Cattlemen's Association, as well as the Virginia Beef Council. Again, just to remind you that there is a lot of misinformation out there, so make sure that information you are getting is from reliable sources. If there is anything that I can do to help, my contact information is on the next slide. Please feel free to reach out to me. Thanks and good luck.